You know, when you think about walking around the world, what really comes to mind? The first guy who officially got credit for it, Dave Kunst, actually used airplanes to hop across the oceans. Now, don't get me wrong, he still walked an incredible 27,000 kilometers, but it was done in separate chunks. Today, though, we're going to talk about a man who took that same basic idea and pushed it to an extreme that is, well, it's almost hard to believe.
So let me just ask you this straight up. Could you imagine starting a walk and then still being on that exact same walk 27 years later? That's not some random hypothetical question. That is the actual reality for the man at the heart of this story.
Okay, to really wrap your head around the sheer scale of this, just look at this comparison. On one side, you've got Dave Kunst's amazing journey, but on the other, you have Carl Bushby's Goliath expedition. No airplanes, no vehicles of any kind, a single, unbroken, continuous path of 58,000 kilometers. That is more than double the distance. We're not just talking about a long walk here. This is one of the most demanding endurance challenges ever conceived.
So who is this guy? Well, his name is Carl Bushby. He's a former British paratrooper, and way back on November 1st, 1998, he set out on this mission he called the Goliath Expedition. And his goal was simple and absolutely bonkers: to walk the longest possible continuous path on Earth.
And this is where it gets crazy. The difference between what he planned and what actually happened is just staggering. Carl started in Chile with literally just $500, aiming to walk all the way home to the UK. He figured, walk about 19 kilometers a day, he'd be there in 8 years. Yeah, the journey had other plans. Over 27 years later, he is still walking.
And here's why. It all comes down to two incredibly strict rules he set for himself. First, absolutely no transport. Not a car, not a train, not even a ride on a donkey. Every single inch has to be on foot. And second, the path has to be unbroken. This is the big one. If he has to stop for any reason, a visa issue, running out of money, whatever, he has to go back to the exact GPS coordinate where he took his last step to continue. These two simple rules would end up costing him years of his life.
So, the journey kicks off at the very southern tip of Chile, in a city called Punta Arenas. And for the next 7 years, the American continents would basically throw every single natural challenge you can imagine right in his path.
Man, the first leg of this journey was just relentless. He started with the insane winds of Patagonia, climbed through the Andes Mountains, and then walked straight into the Atacama Desert, the driest place on the entire planet. From there, he plunged into the notorious Darien Gap, a lawless jungle that separates Colombia and Panama, before trekking all the way through Central America, the scorching hot deserts of the US, and finally, into the frozen wilderness of Alaska.
Seriously, this wasn't just a long walk. It was a non-stop battle for survival. He dealt with everything from desperate thirst in the Atacama to the very real threat of guerrilla gangs in the Darien Gap. He even got arrested and thrown in jail for 18 days in Panama. And because of his rules, as soon as he got out, where did he go? Right back to the exact spot where he was arrested to continue his walk. Unbelievable.
So, after somehow conquering the Americas, Carl came face to face with what would become the two biggest obstacles of his entire expedition: a frozen ocean and a wall of Russian bureaucracy that seemed impossible to break through.
To get from North America to Asia on foot, there's really only one way to do it. You have to cross the Bering Strait. This isn't just a frozen lake. It's a massive, unpredictable stretch of sea ice connecting Alaska and Siberia, and it is lethally dangerous. The ice is constantly moving, shifting, and breaking apart.
He and a fellow adventurer spent 2 weeks making that 240-kilometer crossing. For 14 straight days, with almost no sleep, they had to navigate around massive patches of open, freezing water. Sometimes they even had to swim from one ice floe to the next, with the constant threat of freezing to death. It was a staggering feat of survival, but the moment his foot touched Russian soil, that's when his real problems began.
He was immediately arrested and deported. Why? Because the Bering Strait is not an official port of entry. It took Britain's deputy prime minister getting involved just to get him back in, and even then, he was stuck with these restrictive 90-day visas. For years, he could only walk for 3 months at a time before having to leave for 9. Then his money ran out. Then, in 2013, Russia just banned him for 5 years. Nature had been tough for sure, but human bureaucracy was turning out to be 1,000 times worse.
I mean, at this point, most people would have just given up. But Carl's response to this 5-year ban really shows you the kind of person he is. He didn't just sit around waiting. He walked.
So let's jump forward a bit. He actually got his Russian ban lifted by walking across the entire United States to protest at their embassy. After that, he spent years crossing the rest of Siberia, Mongolia, and Central Asia. But then, boom, another wall. The border to Iran, his planned route, was closed shut. He's stuck in Turkmenistan. So what do? How do you keep an unbroken path going when the land itself is blocked?
Well, if you can't walk on land, you find another way. He decided to continue his path on water. And we're not talking about a quick swim across a river here. He decided he was going to swim the entire width of the Caspian Sea.
He swam 288 kilometers. It took him 31 days. For 6 hours every single day, he swam, towing a tiny kayak behind him with all his stuff. And at night, he'd climb onto that kayak to sleep on the open water, getting tossed around by waves, completely exhausted, all just to keep his unbroken path alive.
And this quote just says it all, doesn't it? He said, "I don't like swimming, but it was necessary." This wasn't some fun side adventure. It was pure gritty necessity. The path demanded it, so he did it. And just like that, he was finally on his way to Europe.
After that incredible swim, Karl walked through Azerbaijan and into Turkey. By this point, he's a well-known figure, and villagers would often welcome him into their homes. He was finally on the home stretch.
In Istanbul, he hit a really symbolic milestone. The Bosphorus Bridge connects Asia and Europe, but it's for cars only. Pedestrians aren't allowed. But the authorities knew about his epic journey and they gave him special permission to walk across it. He officially set foot in Europe. Now, only about 3,000 kilometers separate him from his own front door in England. But there's one last massive problem.
You can't just walk from France to the UK. The path is blocked by the Channel Tunnel, which is for high-speed trains. It's incredibly hot down there, there isn't enough oxygen, and it's just not made for people to be walking around. It is completely, totally forbidden. So, after everything he's been through, is he really going to be stopped just 50 kilometers from home?
Well, there might be a way. See, the Channel Tunnel isn't just one tunnel. It's actually 3. 2 big ones for the trains and a smaller one right in the middle for emergency services. His big hope is that he can get one final piece of special permission to walk through that service tunnel. If he can, he'll complete his journey totally unbroken and entirely on foot.
When he finally takes that last step, which is expected to be sometime in 2026, he will have walked 58,000 kilometers. Just to put that into perspective for you, that's like walking around the entire planet at the equator 1.5 times. It is an absolutely monumental achievement of human spirit and endurance.
I think this quote from Karl himself just perfectly sums up his whole philosophy. Through deserts, jungles, frozen seas, and years of red tape, when the path was blocked, he never ever stopped. He just found a new way forward.
So as we wrap this up, just remember this. Right now, as you're listening to this, Karl Bushby is out there somewhere in Europe, still walking, heading for home. His story is just such an extreme example of perseverance. But it really leaves all of us with a powerful question, doesn't it? When you're faced with an obstacle, what path will you take?